Hi everyone, and welcome to this video where I'll be showing you how you can streamline and accelerate your look development workflows by using material soloing, which has been introduced to Katana 6. When enabled, it allows you to short-circuit a shading network using the 1 to 9 hotkeys so that you can preview various sections of your materials independently without having to rewire the network at all. The results are reflected in interactive render sessions during a preview or live render and will be ignored for disk and batch renders. If you have a live render running, then you can switch between previewing different points of your network, and the render will update to display the material output from that point. You can also map multiple nodes to different numbers, so it's really quick and easy to switch between different points in your shading network and compare the outputs. The material soloing tools really help to speed up common workflows for look development artists. As well as being able to preview each part of your network as you build it up, it also helps you to familiarize yourself with networks handed to you from other artists, as well as debug networks by locating any potential issues much faster, or create really quick iterations of your materials. So let's jump into Katana and take a look at this feature in action. Let's imagine you've received this Katana project from another artist, and they've set up the base material for this spaceship asset. And now you've been asked to add some wear and a layer of dirt to the asset. The first thing you need to do is make sure you understand how this material has been set up and how each section impacts the result that we can see in the render. So I'm going to enable the material soloing tools so I can step through these nodes and make sure I have a good understanding of the setup. To enable material soloing, you can use the icon on the output sidebar, or you can press 0 on the keyboard. And these can both be toggled to enable and disable the tools. Once enabled, the output column will change to show the available ports to solo nodes, as opposed to the material output. And although the material output connection will be hidden, this is only temporary and it's still intact when you switch back to the previous context. These 1 to 9 ports represent the number hotkeys that you can use to preview different nodes. You can make the connections as usual by clicking on the slot and dragging it over to a parameter port, or vice versa. The backtick shortcut can also be used. Or you can make use of the 1 to 9 hotkeys by hovering over a node or specific port and pressing a number on the keyboard. This will create a connection between that parameter port and the slot matching the number you pressed. As you can see, as I make these connections, the live render is updating with the result from the soloed node. And these connections can be disconnected by double-clicking the solo ports, and when all connections are disconnected, then the material will revert back to the final output material. This is a really quick and easy way of making these connections, as it allows you to switch between different nodes very, very quickly. Something to bear in mind is that if the soloing tools aren't active, you can still use these number shortcuts to simultaneously enable the soloing functionality and connect up the selected node or port. So let's use these tools to quickly step through this network and familiarize ourselves with it. Here we have the various texture files being brought in. And as I'm previewing these, you can see that when hovering over the node and using the number hotkey, the first port is being connected up by default. This may not always be the one that you want to preview, so you can also hover over specific ports and use the hotkeys to preview from these other ports instead. It's worth noting that the soloing tools are customizable through Python scripts, so if you need to, you can change how these tools preview certain nodes. Examples for these can be found in the Katana install directory in this location. This will contain example converter plugins for 3D Light, Arnold, Redshift, RenderMan, and USD. You can link up any number of these slots and use the 1 to 9 keys to toggle between them when your mouse isn't hovering over a port or node. This can be really useful if, for example, you want to keep one slot linked to the final material output, so you can always really quickly switch back to it while previewing other nodes. These soloed connections are completely non-destructive and will be reset when you close and reopen a new project, so you don't need to worry about disconnecting them. So we can see that we have this base material here plugged into the base layer of a material mixer, and then the top layer is some decal, which has been brought in and masked by more texture files. There's also a glass material down here, which looks like it's just applied to the windscreen of the ship. So now we have a good understanding of the existing network, and we can start adding the wear and dirt layers. I'm going to start by adding another layer mixer node and plugging the output from the existing layers into the base and the output from that into the ship surface material. And now I can start creating a material and a mask for the dirt. Using a curvature node is a really good way of creating masks for the edges of objects, and this works really well for things like dirt, where it will settle mostly in the crevices. So I'll plug this into the mask input under layer 1. And then I'm just going to create a really basic material for the dirt. So I'll add a fractal node, as this will give us some variation in color. And this then needs to be plugged into a layer node so that it can be mixed with the other base layer. And now if we solo each of these nodes, we can see that they're not doing exactly what we want just yet. So let's jump into the parameters and make some changes. First of all, I'm going to work on the dirt material, and I'll just change the output color to be a couple of variations of brown. And then I'm going to bring the frequency down to scale the pattern. And I'll decrease the layers to define the pattern a little more. I'm just playing around with some of these parameters to get a result that I'm happy with. These nodes are really well documented in the RenderMan documentation. You can refer to them for more detailed explanations of what effect each parameter is having here. But I think this is looking fine for now. So switching back to the mixed result, we still can't see the dirt coming through just yet. So let's jump into the curvature parameters and adjust the mask. I'm going to make sure that I'm viewing the red output because this is what's plugged into the mask input. And so we can see that the mask is completely black at this stage, which is why we're not able to see any dirt on the ship. So I'm going to increase the max distance, as this will spread out the masked area and give a softer gradient between the base material and the dirt. And then flicking back to the result, we can start to see the dirt coming through here. I'll also increase the bias to affect the fall off a little more. And this is starting to look a bit better. But the curvature node is currently outputting both the convex as well as the concave, which isn't what we want for a dirt mask. So I'm going to change the output from both to just concave. And so now we're just getting the dips and the crevices, which is where the dirt will settle. And in this output section in the parameters, we also have this output gain parameter, which I'm going to bring up a little bit so that the dirt comes through just that bit stronger. And I think this is a great start for the dirt layer, but something else that I could do, which would be quite nice, is to break up the mask a little so that it's not so uniform. And to do this, I'm going to use a fractal node and blend it with the curvature. I can use a pixel blend for this. Just plug the curvature and the fractal into the top and bottom colors. And then I'll plug the red output into the layer mixer. And now we can view the result from these blended masks and the fractal pattern. And I'm going to start here to make some changes by reducing the frequency and dimension. And again, just playing around with some of these parameters to get a nice breakup of the pattern. This can be used to create some more rough edges and some gaps in that curvature mask. So looking back at the blended result, we're still just seeing the curvature result. So I need to jump inside the parameters for the blend node and change the operation to multiply. And then I should be able to see the fractal affecting the mask. And if while you're building up your network and you're soloing a lot of different nodes, you may end up having a lot of these connections. So it can be really useful to hover over them to see the tooltip for which ports the connections are coming from and going to. You can also use the slash key in the same way as usual to jump to a node from its connection. So I can hover over a connection, press slash, and I'll be able to see the node that this connection is coming from. So these are great ways to keep track of the various connections in your network and just make it quick and easy to navigate around. And the last thing I'll do here is to add a color correct node after the blend so that I can have more control over the result of this mask. I have a couple of live renders running for different camera angles, and I also have some different lighting setups in this scene. So I can retain the material soloing and switch between these variations to make sure that the materials are looking good under these different conditions. So now I have a mask and a material for the dirt layer, and I can switch back and forth to see the difference here. The soloing tools have made it really easy for me to build up this section, as I can jump between the different stages in the network and view how they're affecting the final results, which makes it a lot easier to make informed edits and reduces the amount of time it may take locating any issues. Without the soloing tools, I would have probably had to create a temporary surface material node to output and link up the nodes that I wanted to preview through it. I'm going to repeat this process to add some wear to the ship as well. And I'll speed this part of the video up as I'm going to use a very similar setup to the dirt. So I'm going to copy these nodes and place them after the decal, as the dirt would sit on top of any wear. So now the live render will update with this layer as well. And I can start making some changes so that this section looks like the wear on the ship's surface. I can simplify this section a little. So I'm going to just use the curvature node without the fractal, and I'll set it to convex this time. And I'm going to add the color in the layer itself, so I'll get rid of that fractal. And the wear isn't overly visible in the final result, so I'm going to jump back to the base material setup and just add a color correct node after the base color. This will allow me to tint that base color to give the surface more of a blue tone. And then the wear around the edges will be a little bit more visible. So now I'm pretty happy with the look of this asset. I'm going to organize each section into shading groups to keep the network tidy. Inside shading groups, the material soloing ports and connections aren't visible to avoid too much visual clutter in this context, but you're still able to use the soloing tools, and the ports will be indicated with a circled number. While we're in the shading group context, I just want to point out that the inputs and outputs can be rearranged by middle mouse clicking and dragging. This can be particularly useful if the noodles are tangled, so they can be really easily reorganized. And now I can just keep on refining these parameters until I have a result that I'm happy with. Using the soloing tools has made it really easy for me to see exactly what effect each node or parameter change is having. If you want to export your material into a look file or USD, the final result will be baked as opposed to the soloed one. So again, you don't need to worry about resetting any of the soloed connections, and this also avoids accidentally baking from the wrong point. I hope you found this video useful and are excited to try out the new material soloing feature. For more information on this or any of the other new features of Katana 6, visit learn.foundry.com/Katana.